Thank you, Kath. Thank you, everybody, for coming and being here today. As Kath said, I'm a psychologist. I did all my study and grew up in Tassie. I've lived in Victoria, I've lived in Sydney, and now I'm here in Queensland. So I've traversed the country, and I'm just going to give apologies that sometimes I get the terminology wrong with roles and things like that. So there's no offence intended, but every state calls things different things in Australia. So I've been here just over a year, so I'm just starting to get to know the Queensland system. So yeah, as Kath said, I work a lot in the sort of autism and developmental disorders field. I've worked in government agencies, and now I've sort of been in private practice for over 15 years, but are still obviously working a lot with schools and other Asian agencies. So yeah, let me start. So we'll be going through executive function today. So what is executive function? So basically it is how we think about our thinking. So to get to navigate life, we need the various parts of our brain to all work together as a functioning system or a team. So to achieve this coordination, the brain acts like a manager and orders all these different mental processes into executive or key functions to help connect past experience with present action. Sorry, I'll just go back there. In simplest terms, the executive function means the ability to get stuff done. So homework, chores, driving to and from places. In other words, to execute complex tasks. Some of it is done subconscious without thinking, others obviously conscious overt thinking. In terms of the subconscious, there's many routines and things that we do without thinking. I don't know if anyone else has ever experienced where you're driving somewhere and then you realise you haven't even paid any attention to how you got there. So I'm glad that's not only me that does that, but it's all our executive functions somewhere working away. So the brain obviously must do a lot of things in order to accomplish a task or a goal. And we as adults sometimes take for granted how long it's taken us to develop our own executive function skills and, forget that the kids are developing at their own pace and having to accrue a lot of skills at the one time. So obviously there can be frustration for the children, and we're sort of having to break those skills down and understand where the need lies for them. An example of that, I was listening to a podcast talking about executive function skills, and it was using the example of a father that was getting frustrated at his son for not picking up his footy boots or something like that. And he said to the son, "What is wrong with you?" And the son replied, "What is wrong with you? I obviously don't know how to do it." So sometimes we have to sort of take a few steps back to realise that there's a skill deficit, or, it's lagging in what our expectations are. I know myself at home, my 10-year-old daughter is a nightmare getting ready for school in the morning, and I end up like nagging, "Have you got your shoes? Have you got dressed? Have you brushed your teeth? Have you brushed your hair?" And it wasn't until sort of reviewing some of this stuff I realised she obviously doesn't have the skills to do it. So we've had to, I had to put my psychologist hat on and work out some strategies that might work with her. Using visuals and things like that, similar to what Rebecca was talking about, to help her build those skills and build the independence without me nagging and, getting into a stressful situation. So if we go through, executive function skills, how they help. So they help us regulate our behaviour in two ways. So the first involves the use of certain thinking skills to select and achieve goals or to develop problem solutions. So these skills include planning. So that's your roadmap. You know all the turns that you need to take to get to a destination, how to get past any roadblocks that may pop up. You know what to focus on, what's important, and what things you need to not pay attention to. I should mention as well, I will make all of this available in a PDF form, and I'll give it to the organisers to email through to everyone, so you'll be able to have a copy of all of this. The second one, organisation. So organisation, that's having a system of organising your information or material, so that things that you need regularly every day, or that when everything has its place, that when you know to go to look for it, that it will be there. So, both organisation systems at home in terms of toys, cupboard, clothes, things like that, as well as at school, lockers, learning materials and things like that. Time management. So time management allows you to manage the tug of war between what you want to do, what you need to do, and what others may be asking of you. So staying on task, sticking to a schedule, things like that. Working memory. So working memory applies being able to hold things in your mind that you are working on at that moment. So being able to keep it in your mind and remembering also what may have worked the last time you did something. And then the last one, metacognition. So metacognition is the what did I do plus why did I do it, and that equals what I will do next time. So it's your brain's life lesson machine. So both the good, the bad and the ugly of what we have learnt from in previous situations. So it allows you to look at the past actions and behaviours, analyse them, use that information to make informed decisions about how to act in the present or in the future. So overall, our executive functions help us to remember to form a picture of that goal, even if the goal is a long way off. So the second way executive function skills help us regulate our behaviour is to focus on the short-term and long-term steps needed to achieve the goal. So these include response inhibition, so being able to control your impulses, so being able to pause and consider before behaving or doing a certain task, as well as resisting, so resisting the distractions from both the environment, from people, and so that's what response inhibition involves. Emotional control, being able to manage your feelings so they don't get in the way of the activity you may be doing or of interactions with other people or schoolwork, etc. Sustained attention, so that is staying on task, getting things done in the time you've given yourself to do it, even when you're tired or bored or there are more appealing distractions, which is very hard in modern life with the distractions around us with technology. Task initiation, so being able to get started on a task. So this is obviously the first step in achieving a goal, whether it's a short activity or a bigger task that you have planned. And then the flexibility is the ability to adapt to unexpected events that come up with and then coming up with solutions. So having a plan A, B, changes to schedule, changes to different teachers, different rooms, different environments, all of those things. And then the last one, goal-directed persistence. So this one's a giant version of sustained attention. So it's you've got a goal, you're determined to get there, and what you do on a daily basis to get to the goal. Keeping it in mind then keeps you connected to the immediate actions you are doing on a daily basis to get to that goal. So this is just a quote from, she's an American speech pathologist, and she actually runs like an online executive function sort of course. She's a bit of a guru in the area. So she says there is no learning without executive functioning. Before we can speak, we must first listen. Before we can listen, we must first attend. And before we can attend, we must first perceive. So she's sort of emphasising that, executive function skills are imperative to any sort of learning, and just how that they can impact, obviously, in a learning environment, that if a child or a student, has deficits in any area, that can obviously impact anxiety, which again impacts learning and sort of that flow-on effect. So we can divide this executive function all of those ones I just listed before into sort of these three main areas. So I won't read out all the other: response inhibition, working memory, etc. But if we look more specifically into the general areas of working memory, so working memory helps kids hold on to information long enough to use it. It plays an important role in concentration and in following instructions and events that require sequences. Weak working memory skills can affect learning in many different subject areas, obviously in reading and math, and then just obviously daily tasks as well, and routines within the classroom. Inhibitory or impulse control. So this involves being able to control one's attention, behaviour, thoughts and or emotions to either override the sort of strong internal needs and desires, and instead to do what's more appropriate or what's required in a situation. Good impulse control allows one to master your thoughts and impulses so that you can resist temptations, distractions and habits, and to pause and think before acting. And then the third one, mental flexibility. So having that flexibility to switch between tasks and strategies, having different strategies to apply to different situations. So this is obviously challenging for individuals with Down syndrome and intellectual disability. A good example of that is, say, the flexibility, say, running outside, and you can run around and be loud out in the playground, and then having to switch and come back into the classroom and change volume level, change energy levels. Those sort of, the ability to sort of do all those things obviously requires a lot of the executive function skills. So being flexible in that way helps deal with uncertainty, solve problems, adjust to the changes and incorporate new information into your plans and ideas. So like other cognitive skills, these follow an individual developmental course. So everyone has their timeline for how things develop. And obviously intellectual ability is different from executive capacity. And you'll certainly see, those with high intelligence can still have very severe executive function deficits that impact their learning and the outcome. So it's always important to look at the sort of underlying executive function skill difficulties. So how do executive function skills help us with learning? So on a daily basis, we're using these executive function skills. They are seen in our ability to make plans, keep track of time, keep track of more than one thing at once, to meaningfully include past knowledge into discussions and conversations, to engage in group dynamics, reading the social situations, evaluating ideas, reflecting on our work, changing our minds and making mid-course corrections while we're thinking, reading and writing. It also helps us to finish work on time, ask for help and advocate for yourself, that impulse control to wait to speak until being called on, and seeking more information when you need it. But obviously the impact in the classroom when people have executive function difficulties, they may manifest in these various ways. So difficult planning a project, having difficulty comprehending how much time a project will take. So that's something I haven't mentioned specifically, but processing speed, so somebody's ability to process the information and then put into action, that's a huge impact obviously on how they manage their time or breaking tasks down and getting things completed. It can impact how telling a story and organising thoughts in a sequential or comprehensive way. Difficulties transitioning from one task to another. Difficulty with the mental strategies involved in memorising and retrieving information from memory. And then also initiating activities, getting started on tasks, knowing where to start, or generating ideas independently. They can also have difficulty retaining information while doing something with it. So phone numbers or, things related to maths or other sort of sequences. So in the Down syndrome field, there's a lady in America, Dr. Deborah Fidler, who's been doing a lot of research in this area. And so they've sort of done it in two ways. So with sort of younger children, they've done it through questionnaires and asking of both parents and teachers, whereas with older children, they've done both sort of lab-type experiments and as well as questionnaires, and they're sort of collating all of that information. So the biggest things that came through were that individuals with Down syndrome, I'd clarify as well that this is sort of looking at research as a group level and recognising that will always be subgroups who may have completely different patterns of strengths and vulnerabilities. So the main areas they said was relating to that working memory, so being able to hold that information in their head to perform sort of tasks that require sequences. So, and this sort of complements what Rebecca was talking about before, that it's the auditory processing. So if we're telling them steps, they have way more difficulty remembering that. So the visual working memory is a lot stronger, and so obviously incorporating all those sort of visual materials is really going to benefit and support that skill difficulty for them. Another area that they mentioned in a study from with 5 to 10-year-olds, they gave them sort of toys and games to play with in between tasks, and they noticed that the children would select toys, so they had intent and desire to play with it, but they'll often hold on to it for a long time before initiating what to do with that. So again, just sort of reinforcing that task initiation can sometimes be something that's challenging for them. And then the second main area was the impulsivity. So being able to sort of inhibit those, all the internal influences as well as external, the sensory, the noise, the movement, the other people, and that inhibition obviously is something that needs a lot of support in the education environment. And then, of course, in response to Caitlin's presentation, say with the co-occurring, say, autism and ADHD, so the Down syndrome and autism, obviously there's going to be a lot more difficulties with that cognitive flexibility, so being a little bit more rigid and resistance to change, transition, and getting stuck on ways of doing things. And then, obviously, with the ADHD, having more difficulties with the inhibitive, impulsive behaviour and activities and things like that. Let me just see whether... And all of this research as well, they're just sort of coming up with they're trialling a number of sort of early intervention programs, looking at sort of working with infants and toddlers and building that sort of social communication and regulation with parents, but they just haven't sort of empirically tested it all, but they said they're showing some really positive results. And obviously as well with Down syndrome, really important to understand that the language difficulties would be impacting the executive skill development as well as some of the motor coordination difficulties. And that they would be needing additional supports in that area, in those areas. And okay, so how to help. So obviously application of a balanced approach that helps the child manage the demands in the short run while also building independent skills for long-term self-management. So obviously everybody who works or interacts with kids has the opportunity to support their executive function. And I would imagine the majority of you who are already working with kids, you're already doing all of these things and supporting their sort of skill deficits, but sometimes I guess it's probably just understanding what the specific targets may be. So they're sort of talking about using some form of data collection, again, not knowing every educational setting is different, what the capacity of who's working with the kids. But, there's books, and I'll put these on the PDF, but at the back so this is an executive skill specific book, and at the back it has a whole number of different sort of checklists and planning forms that sometimes are a good way to sort of go through and work out where there's strengths in the executive function area are, as well as where the highest need of support is for any given time. And importantly, even though executive function skills apply to everybody, it's really important to start at a level of competence appropriate to a child's skill level. So obviously in terms of, say, the planning and time management, you know, great, a high school kid may be able to plan a project from A to B, or whereas a much younger child, you know, in terms of like sequencing of, you know, teaching them to pack their bag in the afternoon, the competence level is going to be completely different and to start at a level that works for them. And you're constantly reviewing and checking in and seeing how that they're going in terms of building their level of independence. So a really important area that is sort of getting a lot more sort of airtime, I guess, now is the whole concept of emotional regulation and co-regulation. So emotional regulation refers to the process by which individuals influence with emotions, by which individuals, their emotions they have, when they have them, how they experience and express their feelings. Emotional regulation can be automatic or controlled, conscious or unconscious, and may have effects at one or more points in the emotion-producing process. So a lot of work has been done in this area in terms of understanding the behaviour we're seeing on the outside of a child and what actually is going on underneath for them, and how that's so important in how we then respond to the child. A really good book, this one, Beyond Behaviour. So this is in this one they talk about the concept of neuroception. So that is, you know, how sort of the neurological wiring of an individual perceives threat or danger, and how they're feeling in terms of whether they're feeling emotional safety or physically safe. And very important to remember that it's in the eye of the beholder. So even though we may perceive that they're in a perfectly safe environment, but their behaviour is telling us otherwise, you know, it still means that something is going on for them internally. So this one is a great one to sort of really understand, and it helps you shift then how you will respond to children when you're seeing those. Well, they talk about overt behaviours, but as well as sort of the still in a distressed state, but they're a bit more internal. So they talk about a red pathway where you're seeing, you know, the physical, you know, the child's getting louder, that you're seeing the emotional outbursts, and, you know, there may be flailing, hitting, you know, physical, whereas there's also a blue pathway where the child has withdrawn and is, you know, on the outside may not look like anything's going on. So this whole concept of co-regulation is that a child builds that capacity for self-regulation through co-regulating with other adults, so be it parents or teachers, and that is sort of the key to how they actually develop that ability to self-regulate. So I was chatting with Kath before, and you've probably all seen, and I mentioned it a bit later, about, you know, the zones of regulation and how does your engine run, all of those sort of regulation tasks. They're fantastic. They teach the pragmatic component, but it can be several years before the kids are able to do those things independently, and it requires that co-regulation with a trusted adult to move through that sort of emotional experience with them. And that sort of comes back as well to the that level of competence of when we're sort of picking the appropriate level of competence for them, and then we can co-regulate it and work through it with them. So another really good book, this is written by a speech therapist, and she talks about, you know, when we're introducing skills or introducing a new task, how when we co-regulate and work as she uses the terminology of master apprenticeship. So we have the knowledge and the experience, and we're imparting that to the children or the teenagers, but at a pace that works for them. And then obviously the ultimate goal is independence. But when you're doing it in partnership with them rather than directing them, there'll be a lot more sort of, and using that example again, say I was saying of nagging my own daughter, it's like me nagging what didn't teach her a single thing. Like it was me reminding her. She would just go through the day and knew that I would end up yelling X number of things before we got out the door. So having to go back, and we developed a chart that is at her cupboard, so do not leave the room until you have T-shirt, shorts, socks, shoes. But I realised I had to start with her. I couldn't just say, go and do it there. She wasn't going to learn it independently. So going in and going, okay, and you're developing that partnership of that master and apprenticeship. And I think these concepts underpin all the others. So when Rebecca was talking about some of the fantastic visual schedules, and I think it was the anchoring one, which I haven't heard of before, sounds fantastic. With all the visual schedules, if the teacher or the aide, and again, I know everyone is stretched in terms of resources and things, so whoever's with the child is working through that with them rather than just saying, here's the schedule, follow it. And it's obviously a much more rewarding engagement then for the child and the person working with the child, because you're not, half the time you're not even realise it's not work for the child, you're connecting and working together with them. So I'll put more information on that in the PDF, but it's a really, and I certainly notice in my own work and in my parenting, since learning and sort of really grasping these concepts, it's a notable difference in how children will respond to you. Another thing that I haven't got on that slide but relates to this is the type of language you use, and that is, when we use imperative language, which is we're asking the child to do something and it requires a response, that often places a demand of them, and obviously across the day that builds up, and that's where you get that demand avoidance and that sort of bucking up against you. Whereas the use of declarative language, so stating things like, a very simple example, when you're packing up, the kids are packing up their bag or whatever at the end of the day, instead of saying, you need to go get your lunchbox, put it in your bag, bring it to me, you're saying, oh, I noticed the other kids are going to their lockers. So it's inviting them to observe and be curious and ultimately problem solve. Again, the capacity to do that depends on the support in the classroom and things like that, but even teachers are able to sort of incorporate that into their sort of instruction. But yeah, really a really interesting sort of switch in how we sort of do it. Let me just see if there's anything else on there. So yeah, just that quote down the bottom, when we engage children in multi-step tasks with this mindset, everything shifts. It becomes a positive interaction rather than a negative prompted one, and we both own the learning. We're able to thoughtfully consider what may be successful to the child and adjust as they are ready for more. And it's not something that requires intensive training or anything. It's literally just sort of reading and understanding a little bit of it, and then the tiny tweaks in how we say things and how we connect with the kids. So now just going through some strategies. Now, I would imagine you are all already doing a lot of these strategies anyway, so it's more just reinforcing what area of executive skill development they apply to. So again, that working memory, holding the information long enough to use it. So using various ways of presenting information. So obviously huge emphasis on that visual, but it might be showing them, using the multi-sensory strategies as well. Teaching them strategies and techniques to aid recall, so grouping, chunking information. A big one that came through from that, Dr. Fiedler was talking about using narration. So for the everyday routines, as you're doing it with them, and you're probably, using those visual supports of narrating what you're doing. So we're going to your locker, we're getting your bag, we're putting your lunchbox in, and then, pausing every now and then and saying, oh, I've forgotten what's next, and getting them to sort of be involved in that. But that use of narration can be a good way to sort of get them to reflect and check. Providing templates for procedures or routines. So again, the visuals, that they know where they are to refer to. And then using concrete storage systems. So, using the colour coding as well, these two blurring into each other. So using colours for things, containers, folders, different items, all of those sort of different things. Again, with all of these strategies, it's a matter of having a big toolbox, and they'll apply in some situations and they'll work amazingly well, but in others they may not. So it's just sort of having a variety of tools, and again across the different kids, it can depend on what works for some, depending on their needs. Impulse control. Oh, sorry, I should also say, this applies to most executive function skills, a really good way to teach them all in a fun way is playing board games and card games. So obviously not Monopoly, because I think Monopoly just always ends up with everyone hating one person, but a lot of board games, they're having to learn to wait, they're having to regulate, all of that sort of within the board games. So yes, impulse control is teaching that emotional regulation through, the co-regulation, zones of regulation, the engine running program, all of those sorts of things. Also, this lies in with the sort of task initiation, helping them break the tasks down. If they're having difficulty getting started on a task, obviously they need that help in breaking it down, and it can be broken down to the smallest parts. When I first started working in the autism field, like 25 years ago plus, I used to do the ABA therapy. And, yes, there's lots to say about that, but the basic underlying principle was breaking it down into the teaching parts. And I guess that's what if we apply, as teachers, apply it to all sort of learning. The planning in advance, so they're aware of routines and schedules, using visual timers, those timer things, and all of those, if they tolerate it, things that beep and flash are all good ways to sort of keep on task. And again, adapting it to the needs of the child. So, they may only be able to stay on task for 1 minute, but that's fantastic. Keep it going for a minute and then incrementally build it up. Teaching what to do rather than not what not to do. So giving them sort of clear directions for what is sort of the appropriate or what's recommended. Now, the use of rewards and everything can be helpful. However, if it's an underlying skill deficit, no amount of rewards is going to improve a behaviour or a task. So that one, yes, we used to use it a lot, and I know they do work in the moment in the classrooms, but that's one that you really need to be sort of reflecting on the individual and seeing how is it working. Are they showing improvement? If they're not showing improvement, you can't reward them for something they can't do yet, or you can't punish, not that anyone would be punishing, but you can't punish for something they haven't learnt yet the skill for. And then, yes, playing games, red light, green light, musical chairs turn, taking, Simon Says, freeze, all those ones are fantastic for the impulse control. And the emotional regulation, the zones of regulation, mindfulness activities. Again, having a massive toolbox. Some of these things work for some kids, others absolutely hate them. So, as you'll get to know your students. And then the same with cognitive flexibility, so the predictability of a routine. Teaching them problem-solving strategies, so narrating the steps. If A can't happen, what's an alternative? What would, there's, again, I'll include in the PDF just a couple of templates of problem-solving, but I would imagine you're probably already using them and applying them sort of as an individual needs. Allowing additional time for tasks, especially when they're getting stuck on things. Teaching, again, using that narration, walking through, modelling multiple ways of doing things, playing games, puzzles, things like that. And planning and organisation. So this is a great one to sort of apply to real life things like, building Lego or following instructions or cooking or doing some sort of art and craft activity, and you're teaching them the sequential steps that are needed for a task. Doing chores or activities that teach them different steps. Again, keeping in mind that competence level that you as the adult may need to sort of do say it's packing up pens or something like that. It might be, okay, you're passing them to me, I'm putting them in the right place. So working out that competence level that works. And I think that'll do. At the end here, I've got just different steps, but I'll keep all of that in the PDF that you guys can all get a copy of. And then this is just sort of emphasising all the different roles that everyone has within, that you've got your classroom teacher, special ed teacher, your assistants, your aides, and then the allied health professionals. And just, the biggest thing to come out of that is everyone communicating and sharing ideas and notes and understanding what all the sort of goals and, recommendations for each of the goals are. Often there will be overlap between different professionals, but as long as everyone is communicating and, agreeing on the course of action for any child. Sorry, that was very rushed and racing through a lot to cover. So, yes, I will do the PDF you'll be able to get a copy of and everything. If anyone has any questions, let me know or come and chat to me afterwards because I think it's morning tea time anyway.
Yes, we'll just...